BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Iona Ballantyne and welcome to a special edition of the Scottish Football Podcast. As we take a pause from the breathless Premiership action, there are so many burning issues in the national game and we know just the man to tackle them. So instead of our usual output, this episode is going to be a Q&A with BBC Scotland's chief sportswriter, Tom English. Never a man shy of an opinion or two here to answer your questions. And as ever, with Tom, nothing is off the table.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sports Scotland.
Tom, I'm really looking forward to this one, and I actually have to say, I'm so impressed with the questions that we've got in.
Well, yes, and I'm slightly daunted by that big build-up you've given me there, Iona. I think it's you're selling this big time. I'm a bit nervous now. I hope I can step up to the plate here.
Now, Tom, there are questions that have been submitted by listeners and by fans via BBC Sports Scotland's dedicated team pages. There's one for each Premiership club, as well as for the men's and women's national teams, and they are great for keeping up to speed with everything that's happening with the side you support, and also to have your say. So there's a good spread of questions here. Tom, are you ready to provide some answers?
No, but let's give it a crack anyway.
It's interesting. At the moment, we're recording this is Monday the 11th. So hopefully by Tuesday when it's out, we still have 12 Premiership managers in a job too.
Well, that's optimistic, I would say. But, yes, I think you're right. Let's hope that there's no major story. But this is Scottish football, Iona, and, blink and a story comes along at you.
Exactly. Anything can happen. Let's actually start, though, Tom, with the first letter of the alphabet, A for Aberdeen. Now, there have been plenty of questions sent in, but let's start with Jack. He says, Jimmy Tilleen and his staff have managed to work wonders with some of the Aberdeen squad this season, some who previously looked to no longer have a future at the club. Has there been any one player at the club who's impressed you in particular?
God, it's hard when you're sitting joint top of the table and unbeaten, going toe-to-toe with Celtic in the league. It's hard to pick out one player, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Because this is a story that's pretty vast and is so impressive across the board. So you could start listing names here. The goalkeeper has been excellent. The back four have played 11 league games in a row. They've started, which is amazing. And they've been very, very solid. Jamie McGrath has been excellent. Papa Gay, out of the team now through injury, was excellent. He's one of the Renaissance stories, as is Duke. Keskinen has been good. Morris has been good off the bench. Clarkson has been... Listen, we could go on and on. I think across the board, ultimately, the one who's impressed the most is Jimmy Tilleen, because he's the architect of all of this. And it's been brilliant.
I like your answer, Tom.
Oh, well,
the man in charge.
Well, you look at what he walked into. Post Neil Warnock, chaos, angry fans, the tawdry, quiet, a lot of empty seats, a lot of questions being asked of Dave Cormack, a lot of anger and bitterness. And he comes in and it's just living proof that a good manager can fix a lot of problems. And he's come in with his authority, with his ability to bring in a player and his ability to improve the players that he has, and he's fixed it. And now Pittodrie is raucous. It's a sellout. The club is floating on air. Yes, they took a bit of a beating in the cup, but they moved on and they bounced back and they scored 4 goals in their next game. It's just so impressive.
Actually, taking into account what you were saying about the players, here's another one from Andrew. He says, assuming Celtic continue their impressive form in Europe into the new year, can Aberdeen take advantage of this in January? Should Dave Cormack get busy in the transfer market and get some cover in defence and midfield? Devlin and McGrath in particular have looked tired in part due to their respective international commitments. Thoughts?
Yeah, look, there is a heavy burden on quite a group of these Aberdeen players. As I mentioned, the goalkeeper and the back four have started every league game. Nielsen and McGrath started 10 out of the 11 league games. Some of these guys are playing international football. So there is going to be, at some point down the line, they're going to get tired. and they're going to have ones to step in there. Dave Cormack in the January transfer window, I think he'll add a bit. They probably could do with a bit of defensive cover. Jack McKenzie has been very good. Jamie McGrath has been very good. Will they get offers for those guys? And I think Jimmy Tillane will probably be anticipating something, because a lot of these players will have drawn attention from elsewhere, probably down south. So you'd imagine the guy that we kind of coming to know, he's probably got his eye on maybe a few replacements if he needs them. He strikes me as that kind of guy. Plans in advance, just in case. Celtic, January, yeah. Big Champions League, burden on them, yeah. Massive resources to add to the squad. Like, massive. So, and Celtic haven't shown any sign that domestically that Europe is bothering them right now. They'll sign some more in January, and I don't think that's going to be an issue. I don't think that's going to bring Aberdeen any respite. They're going to have to do it the hard way. And, you know, they've done it well so far.
I think Andrew may be hoping for a wee trip up.
Yeah, I can't see it, Andrew, but, you know, enjoy the ride. And what an experience it is, you know? Exactly. Their team is shooting the lights out, and it's brilliant.
Exactly, that's what it's all about. There's a couple of interesting questions on some younger players. Matthew says, a graphic was published online this week showing the percentage of minutes given to under 21 players so far this season. Celtic, Aberdeen and Rangers all had 0. As Aberdeen fans, should we be concerned about the lack of youngsters playing, or just accept that if we want to continue mixing it at the top of the table, then we may need to sacrifice under 21 minutes?
This is a big question, and on Sports Sound, at the start of the season, we had a really close look at this. And the numbers are really, really poor. Domestic players, certainly teenagers, up to under 21s, homegrown players, the numbers are very low. And Celtic and Aberdeen and Rangers, they're non-existent. Ideally, all of those clubs would want to bring in their own players. Aberdeen have done it, and they've player trading. They've done it. They've done fine on player trading over the years. I think they'd like more. Every club wants more young players in there, but we're not seeing them. Is that a question? Is that a failure of the academies? Are the players just not good enough? Well, if they're not good enough, and Celtic and Rangers have far more resources than Aberdeen on this front, right? So I'm really looking at those two clubs who invest fortunes in their academies. Why aren't they getting a return out of that? Are the players not good enough? And if that's the case, why? What's the problem with the academy? Are the players good enough, but they're not just getting a chance? And we've seen that with Celtic. They have produced good players, and they've come into the team for a game, 2 games, and then they disappear off the face of the earth. All clubs, I've heard Brendan Rodgers say it over the years. So I heard Ange Postecoglou saying it. Oh, young players, the heart and soul of this club. Well, we don't see it on the pitch. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier for Celtic to do it because they win most games. They win most games quite comfortably. Therefore, they have the capacity to put some young teenagers, homegrown from their academy, on for 15, 20 minutes at the end of the game, which they're already winning 3-0. Other clubs really, they struggle to get themselves into that very envious position.
Like you say, Tom, it's a big debate on Sports Sound, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. It is. And I think we will go on. The SFA did a big piece of work on this, and it's a very impressive piece of work. But like other pieces of work on the future of the game, it's now gathering dust in a filing cabinet. And it's sad that that's the case, but you kind of still live in hope that the clubs in this country, some are doing it very well. Motherwell having a very good season. They've got 2 teenagers in their midfield. So some clubs are doing it. You just want more clubs to be doing it.
Well, Tom, you mentioned Celtic there. Let's actually move on to them now. Ian says, you criticise Celtic's performance against Borussia Dortmund. I do remember that podcast, Tom. He says,
Who didn't?
He actually says, do you believe following that match that Brendan Rodgers has learnt to be more tactically astute when facing superior opposition?
Yes, I think something changed, and I hope it's changed for good, because Brendan Rodgers said that he wouldn't change. He wouldn't compromise in Europe after the Dortmund game, but he has. He has brought in an element of pragmatism, an element of caution. Certainly did it in Bergamo against Atalanta, and they got a terrific 0-0 draw. They were clearly different there. There was less risk taken. They took fewer gambles. on the ball. They closed down the space very, very well. And they still rode their luck, but they got a great point there. And I was very interested. There was a much better balance in their game in Bergamo. I was very interested to see what they were going to do against Leipzig, a fine team, second best team in Germany. Could they still have that ability to stay in a fight, that pragmatism, but could they add a few layers onto it and take the fight to Leipzig? They did all of that and more. I mean, their performance against Leipzig blew me away. I thought it was a magnificent performance, best Celtic performance I've seen in at least 5 years in any competition. And I just thought maybe they've turned a corner here. You know, they're in a great position in the Champions League group stage now, this massive new group that we have. And they're motoring. They've had two really excellent, very different performances, but really excellent.
It'll be very interesting to see what happens next. We do actually have to, Tom, there's been quite a few questions about Celtic on Sunday at Kilmarnock. Anonymous, Paul, James have all been in touch. Ian says, what are we going to do with Remembrance Sunday? Every year is the same disrespect from a section of Celtic fans, absolutely disgraceful that they can't observe 1 minute in capitals even to honour their own dead.
It's cringe-making, it's mortifying, but it's hard to stop it because I don't see a will to stop it. It has been going on for many, many, many years. And the SPFL stand by and allow all sorts of things happen in football stadiums in this country. Whether it's sectarianism, whether it's pyrotechnics, whether it's disrespecting Remembrance Sunday, and nothing happens. You know, they don't get involved. So there's no consequences for this happen. So these people who do this just have carte blanche to do it because they know nothing's going to happen. It's not like UEFA. If UEFA saw this, UEFA would step in and they would threaten stadium closures or part stadium closures and it would stop. But they don't. And I would just, a message like to these, I don't think these people are listening, right? So there's, you know, they're kind of ignorant. Like, I'm going to list a few people here, right? Mm-hmm. And these Celtic people saying, if you know your history, clearly they don't. Patrick Slavin, Lee Roos, Donny McLeod, Archie McMillan, Bob Craig, John McLaughlin, Peter Johnston. All Celtic players who died in World War I. And yet these guys can't even stay silent for 1 minute. I think it's disgraceful. I echo Brendan Rodgers' sentiments and Derek McInnes' sentiments in particular. And I would praise Derek McInnes for having the courage to raise it. It was a pretty grim moment.
The Scottish Football Podcast.
All right, Tom, let's move on to Dundee next. Ben says things were looking so promising at the start of the season for us, but fast forward a few months and things haven't gone quite as well as a lot of Dundee fans would have expected. What do you think is the main reason for our struggle so far? Poor tactical setup, individual errors, lack of leaders in the squad, or the loss of starman Luke McCowan?
Well, certainly the loss of starman Luke McCowan is a massive blow. I mean, you take out Callum McGregor in the Celtic team. Celtic are going to feel that. This is the same. Luke McCowan, he was their talisman. He was a tremendous player for Dundee and they've lost him. They also, I think they're 5 points worse off than this time last season. It's not a disaster, right? And there are mitigating circumstances. Luke McCowan is one. They've had defensive injuries as well. They've hurt them. So they've had some late lapses in games. They've had some chronic errors late in games. You know, they conceded a late winner to St Johnstone. They conceded 3 late goals to Kilmarnock. And I think back, and I've said this on the radio, you think back to the 0-0 draw they got against Rangers in April, which caused, was probably a terminal blow for Rangers' title prospects at the time. And Dundee had in their defence Dodgson, Shaughnessy, McGee and Lammy. Right, now you look at what they have. Dodgson and Lammy are no longer there. McGee has just come back into the team. He's missed plenty of games. Shaughnessy hasn't played at all this season. So Tony Dock is having to cobble together a defence, get confidence in them. They've gone on this cycle of conceding 2 and 3 goals a game. All that confidence eats into these guys, and it just becomes a perpetual cycle, that they can't stop conceding goals. They get towards the end of games and they get a bit jittery. They're lucky that Tony Dock is a guy who's done it before last season. I think he had a tremendous season. And I would bank on him to do it again. I think he's an experienced not an experienced manager, but he's an extremely experienced football man. And I think he'll fix it. They're doing fine. This is by no means a disaster.
Well, let's actually move along the road to Dundee United with an interesting shout from Alexa. She has written in to say, United will need to strengthen in the January window. In my opinion, they should bring Tony Watt back from his loan spell at Motherwell. A few United fans will disagree with me. However, I think it's a no-brainer. He has served his time and would be a great option from the bench. What do you think, Tom?
I have to respectfully disagree.
That's why.
I like Tony Watt. He's not scored all season. No goals in 12 games, something like that. So I'm not sure what the option is. Him coming off the bench to do what? I don't know. I'm not a massive Tony Watt fan. I am a growing fan of Sam Dalby. 4 goals in his last 5 games. I think he's got presence, got physicality. His confidence is growing. You can see that. They do need more up front. They do need more creativity. But again, Jim Goodwin, talk about Tony Dock, I think Jim Goodwin is a good manager. And he's getting a big tune out of these guys. Mm-hmm. So they don't score many, but they don't concede many. Dundee United, What is it? 18 goals scored, 13 goals conceded. That's decent. That's a very, very good start to the season for them. Tony Watt, I think if they have a few quid to spend, they probably need to look at that end of the park. But I'm not sure Big Tony is the answer.
It'll be interesting to see what happens there. Let's move a bit further down on the East Coast to Hearts. Tennant Buckner, he says, do you think that the rumoured Tony Bloom and Star Lizard investment is going to pose a threat to the old firm?
Yeah, that's chutzpah, isn't it? Coming from a supporter of a club sitting, were they last or second last? I can't remember.
I like the optimism.
I like the optimism. Yeah. Second from bottom, 11th. A pitiful beginning to the season for Hearts. I think this is potentially seismic for Hearts. I genuinely do, because this Jamestown Analytics company are fascinating. They're a bit mysterious. They're very secretive, but they're very successful. Any of the clubs that they go into, they improve them. No doubt about it. And we're not just talking about the Brightons here, because, Brighton are they're kind of, that's their pin-up. They've done it in other clubs, smaller clubs of similar size of Hearts. And if they can identify players that make Hearts a better team, that can then be sold on for profit, that's potentially game-changing. I don't think it's game-changing to the extent that they're going to challenge Celtic. I think Celtic are in a different sphere financially. But they could get them shake up into second place. And they could change the landscape in this country, actually. Because if this works out for Hearts, and they're seen to be buying in players, unheralded players, who do well and then are sold on for profit, then everyone is going to want to get involved in analytics, more so than they already are. Jamestown will only take on a limited number of clubs. Hearts are their club in Scotland. But there are other companies out there that are dealing with this. Maybe not as sophisticated or as successful as Jamestown, but there are other clubs doing this. And, I could think of a few clubs who could maybe not far from Tynecastle that could do with some help on recruitment.
Well, surely, Tom, that method, it's only a matter of time before it really kind of starts to take over. Maybe not take over, but really embed itself up here.
Yeah, it is. I mean, what's surprising is it's taken this long. This is it's not the future; it's the present. Mm-hmm. And a lot of clubs every club in the Premier League down in England, they're pretty much involved in this to an extent. Now they can afford to be; they've got buckets of money. But I think every club in Scotland is going to have to engage in this. And this is why I think everyone is looking at Hearts and Jamestown and what happens here. Obviously, they were involved in the selection of Neil Critchley, the new manager. So That's the kind of first examination. And the next transfer window in January, that'll be the next examination of their worth. So I think it's very, very interesting. It's a very interesting addition to the landscape up here. What are Hearts going to do? Because they're going to have to do something. Because where they are at the moment now is mortifying.
Well, let's move to bottom of the table, Hibs. Some questions here from clearly some very frustrated fans. What do you think of this one, though, from Anonymous? Do we continue with David Gray and hope he turns the situation around? Or, as I suspect the current board will do, is throw him to the wolves? We can't afford to give this job to someone with little or no managerial experience. It's got to be a tried and tested. I know he's not everyone's cup of tea, but, wait for this, Tom, Neil Lennon is available. Hibernian Football Club, the clock is ticking.
Well, look, Neil Lennon, I'd say, you compare what Hibs are now, bottom of the league. Shocking state. 8 points after 12 games. I mean, it's disgraceful, really. Mm-hmm. For a club as big and as terrific as Hibs, this is just unacceptable. Compare what they were like under Neil Lennon. They were playing good football, scoring tremendous goals, giving the old firm a bloody nose from time to time. That was a different Hibs. So whatever about the Neil Lennon question, I don't know about that one, but the Neil Lennon era can certainly be seen as the halcyon days compared to this rubbish, without a doubt. Everybody's to blame in Hibs. Everybody. The players, the manager, the sporting director, Malcolm Mackay, the board of directors, everyone. The recruitment has been terrible for a long number of years. So it's not just on David Gray, although he's carrying the can right now. It's on the decisions that have been made for years, decisions that were made in the summer. This team has cried out for competent, not really good, but just competent centre halves for a long time. Malcolm Mackay has come in the summer. He's the head of recruitment, so we're told. He is the guy bringing the players in. He signs Ekpiteta and O'Hora, signs the goalkeeper, and somehow makes them worse, the team worse. And I'm saying everyone's to blame. Maybe I can go back on that a little bit. Like, if Ekpiteta and O'Hora and the goalkeeper, maybe that's as good as they are. Maybe they're not any better than that. They're trying their heart out, but that's it. That's all they've got. So they're not good enough. It's not like they're slacking. They're just not good enough. But they've been signed. And why have they been signed? And then you could extend that around the team. They're in an awful, awful state. Terrible state. And if David Gray might pay for it with his job, he might. Another one. Revolving Easter Road door. And what might happen? Well, Malcolm Mackay might come in as the manager. Maybe, maybe not. And we start again. There's something really fundamentally wrong with that club. And they're on a vicious cycle of making terrible decisions. And until they start making good decisions, this is just going to repeat on a cycle. It's Groundhog Day. That's all it is.
Well, you know who to call for, Tom? Tony Bloom.
Well, I tell you, now, that analytics company won't get into bed with Hibs and Hearts, no chance. No. But there are a few others out there. And if I was Hibs, that would be a piece of recruitment that I would be looking very seriously at. Because clearly the people who are signing, whether it's Malcolm Mackay or whoever was signing them before him, they're not good enough. These people aren't good enough. And I know Malcolm Mackay has some friends in the media, and they're bigging up his prospects, and it's not his fault and it's the other one's fault. It's nearly everybody's fault. And somebody's going to have to go in there and fix it.
Well, we could talk for so much longer about this, but we do need to move on, Tom. Let's go to Killy, our sole Killy representative, Frank. He says, do you feel that Kilmarnock have been unlucky or harshly treated with players being sent off?
Well, there's been a lot of them, isn't there? Look, off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of all the different incidents that led to the Reds. Maybe there was one or so that are harsh. I think from memory, most of them were justified or borderline. I think Derek McInnes has been very good on this and hasn't sought kind of sympathy or excuses in a large part. I think he's taken them all on the chin, and he's been critical of the decision making that some of his players have made in those in those moments. And some of the Reds were just ludicrous, like from indiscipline point of view, and self-defeating. And you look at Kelly, they've had Europe to deal with. That was difficult enough. But I think they're in a false position. I think they'll come through. I think Kelly will come through. They're 4 points down on where they were last season, I think. I don't have many fears for them. They have a very, very good manager. And I think they will be banging on the door of top 6. But I say that about a few others as well. You know, I say that about Motherwell. I say that about St Mirren. I say it about Hearts. They can't all be up there. You know, somebody's going to miss. Some of these clubs are going to miss out because Celtic, Aberdeen, Rangers, and I would say I'm getting to the point now where I think Dundee United are going to be top 6. There's only 2 more spots left.
We still have a lot to get through and not much time left. Let's get to Motherwell. Derek says, what have you made of Motherwell this season? Do you believe we can sustain our form to finish in the top 6? And do you think Motherwell can keep a hold of Lennon Miller for the season?
Can you keep hold of Lennon Miller for the season? I suspect yes. Maybe not beyond the season, but I suspect yes. I hope yes. He's terrific, but he's not the only. And there's been so much talk about Lennon Miller, understandably. I hope people aren't putting mad pressure on him. I know Stuart Kettlewell won't be because he's a very responsible and very impressive manager. But there seems to be, and I've seen it a million times before, a desperation amongst us in the media to suddenly anoint a boy wonder. Mm-hmm. And you can see there are reasons to anoint Lennon Miller as a boy wonder because I think he looks a fine player, but he's still a kid. And he needs time and he needs a bit of space. You know, I think there are loads of players in the history of Scottish football who have been trumpeted as the next big thing and they don't quite do it. It's not all about ability. It's about ability and mentality. Now, Lennon Miller seems to have both. But let's I mean, it's a plaintive cry. Let the lad have a little bit of space because he won't get any space because we want the next big thing. But he looks a fine prospect. I mentioned, we talked earlier before about the lack of young Scottish players getting proper game time. Lennon Miller and Ewan Wilson, mainstays of this Motherwell team. Part of the reason why I really like this Motherwell team. Part of the reason why I like Stuart Kettlewell. He has an amazing ability to find players. You know, they'll do a job. You know, his goalkeeper is excellent. Again, they don't score a lot. They don't concede much. They're a tightly controlled team. They're a compact side. They might go 2 or 3 games without a win, but then they'll bounce back immediately. You know, they're a very resilient side. Maswanisi has been a big find for him as well. 3 goals in his last 3 games. Kettlewell just seems to find these guys, and it keeps the show moving forward. So, yeah, top 6 wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Motherwell were top 6.
All right. Well, Tom, Joe, Ian and Simon have all sent in questions on Rangers. I'm intrigued to hear your answer, though, to James. He asks, why are you and the BBC so utterly obsessed with Rangers and the constant negative agenda you both constantly pursue? What would you say to James, Tom?
Well, it's this negative. Well, first of all, we're not obsessed with Rangers. And I know this is a narrative amongst some that we are. We're not. You look at the breadth of the coverage through radio, television, online, social media, podcasts. Every club in the country gets big coverage. And I have worked in England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, in sports media. I've never seen a league covered the way this league is covered, or these teams are covered. Championship football Friday night. We're not obsessed with anybody. But I know that's the narrative, and nothing I'm going to say is going to change that. It's a huge amount of coverage.
A great BBC plug, Tom.
Well, I think it's true. You know, we get branded, oh, you're an old firm obsessed. We're not old firm obsessed. We're very interested in the old firm. Very, very interested. But I would say we've spoken more about Aberdeen this season than any other club, you know, because it's such a great story. Anyway, what was the second half? Before my rant there, what was the second bit of that?
Do you know what, Tom? I'm actually going to ask you a question from Jim, right? He says, Tom, I wrote to you on September the 5th this year and asked if Mr. Clement was the right man for Rangers. You said that he was and that he'd won cups and leagues in other parts of Europe. His is only a defeat or draw away from losing his job now. What are your thoughts now?
I don't think he's a defeat or a draw away from losing his job. I know that's how it's been framed, but how do we know? You know, we were told that if they lost at Hampden, he was a goner. Who says? Where does that information come from? I think that's just, again, it's a creation. It's something we think should happen, or maybe Rangers fans think should happen, but there's no substance to it. I don't think, like John Gilligan, the interim chairman at Rangers, has tipped off people in the media and said, by the way, if we don't beat Motherwell, he's a goner. It doesn't happen that way. I still think that he's the right man for the job. Now, he has a hell of a job on his hands. He's got a squad that's patchy, unimpressive. He's also the figurehead of the club because there's no permanent chairman there. There's no chief executive there. The head of academy, all the key positions, many of the key positions are got a big vacant sign over them. So why I have a lot of sympathy for Clement because he's getting it in the neck from his own fans for the really underwhelming performances they're putting in, while at the same time there doesn't appear to be leadership around him. There's nobody there to kind of lighten his load, from what I can see. It's all on him. I do still think he's the man for the job, but the job is getting harder and harder and harder. And I think some of his post-match stuff is not impressive. He's coming across as a guy that's struggling. And the Aberdeen situation, the fact that Tilleen could come in, I mean, Clement comes in and talks about a rebuild and it's a long-term project. Tilleen has come in. It's a rebuild. Mm-hmm. It's a project, but it hasn't taken long-term to fix it. It's fixed it in a couple of months, a couple of weeks, you might argue. So that Aberdeen now are putting, not just Celtic, and Aberdeen are putting pressure on Clement. But I don't think there's anything served by getting rid of him. That's another manager you got to pay off. And who do you get in? These are troubling times at Rangers, but I'm not sure sacking the guy is the right way to go.
Well, as mentioned at the start of the podcast, Tom, hopefully by the time this goes out, there are still 12 managers in a job. We are running out of time, but I do want to finish off with this one from Eddie, who I suspect could be looking for an optimistic answer. He says, Tom, where will the Buddies finish this season?
Oh, I get into trouble years ago with St Mirren fans. I'm trying to make it up to them ever since.
Say a good number for them.
I like the manager a lot. Again, my numbers tell me that they're 7 points down on where they were this time last season. They scored fewer goals and they've conceded a few more. I still don't think they're going to be far away from sixth. Again, they're one of these clubs. They're one of maybe 4, maybe even 5 clubs, maybe 4 clubs that are going to be nip and tuck for 5th and 6th place. So,
think it could come down to a fine margin?
Oh, it will. I'm certain it'll come down to a fine margin. I'm certain it will. And it could be refereeing decisions. For or against. It could be injuries. Are they lucky or are they unlucky? It could be in January that they just find somebody. One person that makes a difference. That's all it takes. I think it's really fine, whether it's a goal scorer, whether it's a defender. I think these are desperately fine margins between a number of these clubs. But what they all have in common, for me, is they've got good managers who know their way around this league. And I think that's what makes it pretty compelling.
What's your final answer?
My final answer is that St Mirren, hang on, let me think about this now. Celtic first. God, I'm making myself a hostage to fortune here.
We're getting full table.
Celtic. Well, I have to work it out in my thick head. This is the way I have to kind of work it out, even though it'll still be wrong. Celtic first. I think Aberdeen will be second.
Oh wow!
Yep. I think Rangers will be third. Now it gets tricky.
Yeah.
I think Hearts could come through to be fourth.
Whoa!
I know.
It's almost stable.
I think they're in a false position. They're in a false position. They have problems up front. I think they desperately need to sign a striker. Lawrence Shankland doesn't look fit to me. They need a striker in January. So if they bring in a striker in January and a couple of others, I think they have it within them to go fourth. I think Kilmarnock 5th, Dundee United 6th, St Mirren 7th.
Oh, wow. Right. We need to revisit this in 6 months' time. That is so table.
Now, that's going to be completely wrong. And if I was an Aberdeen fan hearing me predicting that they're going to be second, I would be utterly fed up.
Yeah.
My predictions are notoriously rubbish.
Oh, Tom.
I know. And if I was a St. Mirren fan hearing that they're not going to finish in the top 6, I would be euphoric. So anyway, look, it's going to be tight. That's my one message out there.
Okay.
It could be a point. There could be a point between all of these teams vying for 5th and 6th.
All right. Did you hear that, Eddie? Tight but 7th. I'm sure he will not forget you saying that. That is all we've got time for. Many thanks, Tom English. And thank you for submitting so many excellent questions. It's always great to hear from you. So don't hesitate to get in touch. Our email address is scottishfootball@bbc.co.uk. Now remember and keep an eye on your club's dedicated page on the BBC Sports Scotland website and mobile app for lots of great content, and we'll be posting Tom's answers up there throughout the week too. And to make sure you don't miss an episode of the Scottish Football Podcast, just subscribe on BBC Sounds and have push notifications turned on in your phone settings. Now, it may be the international break, but as you've just heard, Scottish football never stops. We will see you next time. Goodbye.
For everything you need to know about your team this season, download the BBC Sport app. All the latest news, goal updates, stats and scores, and insight and analysis. Just select your club to get the biggest stories and best content at your fingertips. What a result. Download the BBC Sport app for everything you need to know about your team this season.